Hello and welcome back to this damn idealistic crusade. In this video I'll be reviewing the collected version of Batman 89 Echoes, which is now finally available from DC in a hardcover collected edition. This is the unfortunately long delayed follow-up comic to the Batman 89 series that saw the return of screenwriter Sam Hamm, who's the original writer on the Batman 89 film, to what is now known as the Burtonverse. And these comics essentially pick up where Batman Returns left off and continue in a different path and ignoring the directions taken by the Schumacher films. I enjoyed the original comic back when it was out in 2022 and reviewed the hardcover collected edition. I reread it before jumping into Echoes, which I had actually waited until it was complete to read, and I'm kind of glad I did, because what most people may know about this comic, and what hasn't helped its reputation, shall we say, is the extreme delays that led it to being stretched out over 2 years for what is only a 6-issue comic. So if you had actually read issue 1 when it came out, that was well over 2 years ago. So it really was best to wait until it was completed and collected now in this new version that's literally just out in October 2025 as I'm recording this video. And in fact, the delays took so long that in the interim, we got the outstanding John Jackson Miller Batman Resurrection novel, also set in the Burton timeline of films, and basically doing its own thing with the same idea, except it picks up from the aftermath of the Batman 89 film. And now we're about to get its follow-up sequel, Batman Revolution, which is also out this month, October 2025, and I'm eagerly anticipating that. So in the space of time that it took to get the 6 issues of Batman Echoes and then get them collected, we've been able to get 2 entire novels. So that definitely also shows how unbelievably long it's taken to get this comic completed. Now, I wish I could say that it was worth the wait, because it was not. I have to say that as a reading experience, I was extremely disappointed. Batman 89 Echoes has a number of promising elements and picks up after the events of the first comic, so it's really best to read Batman 89 first, or at least refresh yourself like I did if you haven't read it since it came out, as it's been several years now to get this storyline finished. In Echoes, we're sort of thrust into things, and over the first issue, we discover that it's been 2 years in between the comics, so that's kind of ironic since it took 2 years to get Batman 89 Echoes out. And on top of that, Batman himself does not really appear for most of the 6-issue run. He only really appears in issue 4. The plot that emerges is one that's more of a slow-burning mystery with Bruce Wayne operating undercover, and for reasons that aren't always quite explained very well. The biggest issue with Echoes is that it tries to cram in so many different concepts and ideas, and none of them are properly developed or fleshed out. It's as if they took a whole bunch of things and threw them at the wall to see what sticks, and none of them do. You do have some of the grounding and tone from the original Batman 89 storyline, and you've got the whole creative team returning, so it does retain some consistency. But if you haven't read Batman 89, this is not going to make a lick of sense, and even if you've read Batman 89, this story does not make a whole lot of sense by the time you end it. You sit there scratching your head after you finish. I certainly did. I'm still scratching my head, because if you were asked to detail what the plot actually was, I don't think that's entirely possible outside of the general setup. And then there are the inclusion of a multitude of different characters, so much so that we have, of course, the promised Burtonverse versions of Harley Quinn and the Scarecrow, as are seen on the cover, and eventually a version of Barbara Gordon in a batsuit. Of course, she's now the chief of police in the Echoes storyline. But there are multiple other classic Rogues Gallery characters who I won't name because I don't want to spoil their appearance. So you essentially get Burtonverse versions of multiple classic Rogues Gallery characters, in addition to the ones seen in Batman 89, and we do have a reappearance of Catwoman, still based ostensibly out of the Returns iteration, although the way she acts in both 89, the comic, and Echoes doesn't necessarily always gel with the Selina Kyle characterization from the Batman Returns film. But as you're reading the 6 issues and you see more of the classic rogues appearing, you don't necessarily care all that much because they just seem to appear out of thin air, and you suddenly realize, oh, wait, why are they here exactly? What is going on? I don't know. I'm just reading to finish this. That's my experience with this comic. That's how I felt reading this. And the whole time, and especially by the end, I thought to myself, that made zero sense. Why did I wait 2 years for this thing? And I spent money on this. Great. The original 4 Batman films have often been criticized, and it's said that they essentially make Batman as a character take more of a backseat in his own movie, and that the movies belong more to the villains, and Batman is much more reactive. I've always fought back against that criticism, but if you ever wanted to label that for any Batman property, well, Batman 89 Echoes certainly does that. The other primary characters do far more than Batman does. Batman, again, does not appear until issue 4 of 6, and Bruce Wayne himself does act quite odd throughout, stemming from the events of the Batman 89 first comic, but also due to the completely random seeming nature of the plotting, and there being so many different elements going on at the same time with all these plates spinning in the air, and they seem completely unconnected to one another. The book seems nonsensical throughout. I would say its most effective element is the new Burtonverse version of Harley Quinn and how she's integrated into the plot as being a television psychologist obsessed with ratings, and it's nicely done. And in fact, I wish we had just followed her story. She only appears at random intervals and doesn't really have much impact on the story either. And that can be said even more for the new version of Jonathan Crane, or the Scarecrow, as while we do have a significant portion of the plot taking place in the asylum with Crane in charge and experimenting on patients, that doesn't really go much of anywhere. And the actual appearance and usage of Scarecrow himself is almost laughably minimal. And that even goes for the other Rogues Gallery characters who appear. And by the end, you're suddenly dealing with another legendary villain who's appeared, and how or where or why he's there, you don't really know. And all of a sudden, especially in the last issue, most of all, issue 6, the plot speed that's already been moving significantly fast and is hard to keep up with or even process what's going on, gets turned up even more, as if everything's having to be crammed into the last issue or two to just wind everything up. And on top of that, you've also got multiple covers and variant covers that promise and show various characters and things that either don't really appear or are only there for a flash, or you have to wait until the very end, such as Barbara Gordon actually donning a batsuit. It's shown on multiple covers of the 6 issues and only happens at the very end of issue 6 for, like 1 second, and it's really not worth anything. Perhaps the ultimate example of Batman taking a backseat in his own comic or story is that most of the heavy lifting in the hero work and all of the amount of time in focus as the sort of character leading the plot is actually given to this universe's Robin, Drake Winston, who was introduced in the 89 original comic and based on the idea of the original Robin that was supposed to be in Batman Returns and played by Marlon Wayans. So this Robin is very much styled on that concept and was nicely done in the 89 comic. The best part about the first comic is that the story setup was grounded and you could actually follow along with the plot and everything made sense. It maybe wasn't as inventive in some areas as you would have wanted, but it was also the first in a new series, and stemming off of the 2 films. So for what it was, it worked, and everything in it worked. Well, in Echoes, you'd be mistaken for thinking that it's actually supposed to be a Robin led comic, because the Robin character in this story basically is doing most of everything, with Bruce Wayne only being in the asylum undercover for reasons that he keeps to himself, and then eventually donning the Batsuit in issue 4. And after doing a couple things, then basically goes off on his own mission, which is apparently revealed to be a sort of suicide mission, and it's never explained exactly why this is going on. All the while, we get little burst peppered throughout of the Harley Quinn development, of Harley Quinzel becoming Harley Quinn, and then that really doesn't go anywhere and doesn't tie very much into the overall story arc. There's also additional subplots aplenty with Barbara Gordon, and in the 2 years between comics, Bruce Wayne not being able to be Batman and having to relinquish that, and so this is him basically coming back into the fold. There's just way too much going on, and this is an incredibly jumbled reading experience. It doesn't make sense all that much while you're reading it, and particularly when you get to issues 5 and 6, they really don't make any sense because the pace is picked up exponentially, and you definitely get the sense that it's rushing to complete at least enough to finish out the 6-issue run and I guess have some semblance of sense and reach an ending point. I assume there are plans for an additional series because there are plenty of plot threads here that are not resolved or don't really go much of anywhere. But whether or not that will happen, I don't know, especially since the Echoes line was spread out an absurdly long time, and people buying the individual issues either gave up or got extremely frustrated. And the reviews so far, if you look at the reviews for each of the issues, they're not great. And then the last 2 issues especially have pretty terrible reviews, and the overall reception of this comic has not been the greatest. It didn't help that it was stretched out for such a ridiculously long time, and that left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. Understandably so, because it shouldn't have taken this long to just get a 6-issue storyline. I could have forgiven the delays and having to wait this long, at least if the story was good or if the reading experience was at least enjoyable. I was expecting something at least on the level of the first comic, and I'm glad I reread that first, because had I not and just jumped into Echoes, I really would have been even more confused. Rereading the first comic now does show more of its inherent flaws and things. It's not a perfect story, but the first time I read it, you had the newness factor, and it was the first project in this sort of resurrecting the Burtonverse, as it's called now, and digging back into the world of the Michael Keaton Batman and playing around in that sandbox once again. But after that, we've now gotten the Great Batman Resurrection novel, which I thought was superb, and the Batman 89 first comic does have some similar issues as what turn up in Echoes, but Echoes just increases those dramatically and adds even new ones. Echoes is not without its positives. Again, I think the new Burtonverse version of Harley Quinn is very well done. I like the stuff that's being done with the Barbara Gordon character in this particular iteration, and there's at least a continuation of some of the grounding and sense of the Batman 89 world that was in the first comic. So you can definitely tell that it is building off of the first comic and what that did. But I just wish it had chosen maybe 1 or 2 of the plot lines and story threads that it's got, instead of having just everything thrown in the book all at once and nothing is fully realized and the reader is very confused and frustrated. I will say the art from the same team of Joe Quinones and Leonardo Ito, among others, it is also continuing what was done on the first Batman 89 comic. It is very good throughout, but also I think even the art at times reflects some of the chaotic nature of the different story threads going on, and then the extreme length of time it took to get all the 6 issues, because there does at times feel like there's a little bit of inconsistency in the artwork. I'm not terribly picky when it comes to comic book artwork, and in terms of what you usually see in a lot of comic book reviews that can get into the intricate details of the art itself. But even reading this as someone who only reads comics every once in a while, you got the sense that it wasn't just the story that was incredibly chaotic, that the art sort of picked up on this at certain points. It was never hard to follow in terms of the actual layout design, and the art is mostly very good, but even that just felt like it was a little bit off in places compared to what was seen in the first Batman 89 comic. I can only assume, but I have to guess the extensive delays did play into at least some of the issues I'm picking up on. But as a reading experience, this was just unbelievably chaotic and very disappointing. I did not enjoy reading this at all, really, outside of, having some of the classic likenesses of the 89 iterations of the characters and the new version of Harley Quinn being a bright spot, but she ultimately does nothing in terms of affecting the story, just like most of the other characters and plot lines don't really affect the story. And by the end of this book, you'll feel like you just read a bunch of pages and you can't even process what you've just read. You have to sit there and scratch your head for quite a while, and a week later you're still scratching your head because it doesn't really make sense, and it's a very frustrating read, unfortunately. So we've now got the hardcover collected edition done in the same manner as the first comic got its hardcover. This was just released this month in October of 2025, with the main artwork showing the two primary villains who ultimately wind up not really affecting the story all that much, and it could be argued that maybe they're not even the primary villains because there are other villains who show up. So, but these are at least the ones that are put on the cover and the ones that people know about, so they're not spoilers. The actual cover is given the same high gloss reflective quality as the first book. There's a slight wraparound spine effect, and then we have one of the other covers on the rear. I have to say that all of the main covers are really well done, and in terms of art, I think the covers are actually the best part of the whole comic, and they are not always representative of the comic you're going to read. They indicate things that don't happen until the very end, or they seem a bit more epic than the stories that are inside the issues that they grace, and you kind of wish that you were getting the comic that the covers are actually promising, because you really don't, unfortunately. We've got the same basic design type as the first book, so we get this sort of cloud formation on the end papers, but it's now red, whereas in the first book it was a sort of blue-purple. We've got some nice art on the flaps of the dust jacket, and then of course the credits on the back for the creative personnel and their biography blurbs as well. Just like the 89 comic, the hardcover itself has the cute addition of actually being made to look like a vintage Warner Home Video VHS tape, just now updated with the credit for Batman 89 Echoes. So you've got the exact label of what was on the original VHS label from Warner of Batman 89, with the VHS Hi-Fi and Dolby Surround, digitally processed, all the fun stuff, but it's just updated as being for Batman 89 Echoes. The spine is made to look like a handwritten label done for a tape you would have made back in the day, and then the reverse actually has the underside of a VHS cassette. Now, this is a cute concept, as it was on the actual book for Batman 89 that did this originally. I was personally hoping that they would continue this, except I was really hoping that they would tweak this and maybe do the Laserdisc label and have a Laserdisc in the back in terms of the rest of the book, or something like that. But basically what they've done is continued the same concept, so at least they match, and they kept this cute little idea. The only thing is that these are identical. It's the exact same image, 100%, the same back cover, and while, yeah, I guess technically they should match, all they did was change the label. These are otherwise exactly the same, right down to the same little marks on the source image that they used of a VHS in close-up. So at least they kept the same aesthetic, but otherwise it's identical, and that doesn't really scream creativity, and it did make me feel a little bit disappointed that they literally just copied the same image and changed the label. So the spines match if you display them without the dust jackets, and the dust jackets do go pretty well together as well. I think you'll also be able to note, it doesn't come across on camera as much, but the new Echoes printing, even though the books are pretty much exactly the same length and same design, the new Echoes hardcover is a little bit thinner than the original 89 comic was. So I guess in the years since, binding has gotten tighter and they've been able to compress the size down a little bit, but of course they are the same price. So I just thought that was interesting because I figured it would be the same size as Batman 89, but it's actually a little bit thinner. That may have something to do with the other difference between the two hardcover editions, and that is that Echoes is printed on glossy paper that feels very modern, but it's also quite thin paper. Whereas on the original 89 comic, you had what seems to be more of a vintage style printed directly on paper without really having a gloss finish, and the pages are a little bit thicker and sturdier. Essentially, this looks and feels more like a comic from the 90s or so, and then this looks and feels like a modern comic. And I wouldn't have recognized this had I not reread the 89 comic first and reminded myself, oh yeah, this has that sort of aesthetic that I think they were trying to go for, having a more of a vintage look and feel. Whereas at this, you've got the high gloss, very thin pages, and so it just feels like a modern comic. There's no sort of texture to it like it is in the original 89 hardcover, where everything just has that texture to it. So I think the pages are a little bit thicker, which accounts for this feeling thicker and actually feeling a bit more premium. So I think that's another sign of how the Echoes comic does feel like a downgrade even in the overall printing as compared to what the original 89 series got. And then here are the two dust jacket spines side by side. So this is what they'll look like on the shelf. And you can say that they're designed to match, at least for the most part, but it also shows how the Echoes book is definitely thinner than the 89 one. And then for extras, we get the sketchbook at the end with some of the character designs, and then a gallery of some of the variant covers as well. So you do get the typical sorts of bonuses if you opt for the collected hardcover version over the individual issues. So ultimately, I found Batman 89 Echoes a complete disappointment. I've been eagerly anticipating getting this and Batman Revolution in the same month, getting the continuations of the two new versions of the Burtonverse that echo some in certain ways, but have taken completely different paths. So now I'm waiting for Batman Revolution to come out at the end of this month and hopefully give me a much more enjoyable time reading it than I had with Echoes, which, while it has some interesting ideas and concepts and characters, it's got way too much going on, and unfortunately that shortchanges and undermines, I think, virtually everything in the book. It could have worked. You can see the elements that could have worked had they been developed a bit more, and you definitely get the sense that two, if not even more, comic book arcs of story material have just been shoved into one, and it does not work. As a continuation of what we saw in the Batman 89 comic, yes, it technically picks up where that left off, although there's a gap in between of 2 years that one can only surmise is now as a sort of unintended end joke at the 2 years it took to actually get the complete Echoes comic. And that delay really gave the comic a bad name among most fans, especially people who had been buying it issue by issue and kept waiting and then would totally forget the story story by the time the next issue would come out, and then have to wait months and months for the next one after that. So DC did not do themselves any favors in making it take an absurdly long time to just get 6 issues completed. As a reading experience, I found it really frustrating. I don't think the book really works. The art is pretty solid throughout, and the overall hardcover version does give you the usual sort of extras and is a better value in the long run than buying the 6 issues individually. But I can't really recommend this to anyone unless you're a diehard fan of the Tim Burton directed films, the Michael Keaton Batman, or if you were a diehard fan of the original '89 comic. Outside of that, I would recommend this if you're curious, maybe. But that would be about it. I hate to be so negative, but this was just a really frustrating and perplexing experience. I still don't really know what to make of Batman '89 Echoes as a story. It didn't really work for me at all, which is a shame because I've been looking forward to it for 2 years, and I'm such a huge fan of the original films, and I did enjoy the first '89 comic. I thought it was very solid and well executed for what it was, but it was completely overshadowed by the outstanding Batman Resurrection novel. So I would recommend people try the '89 comic if you haven't, but I absolutely would recommend people check out John Jackson Miller's novels, because the second book is also coming out this month, Batman Revolution. And I'm really hoping and anticipating that to sort of wash out the bad taste of the experience of reading Batman '89 Echoes and just not having a good time at all. I do hope that DC does continue with projects like this. Whether it means another Batman '89 comic or not, I don't know. I will say that the equivalent Superman 78 comics that were done, there have been 2 of those. Those were outstanding, and in fact I'd like to do videos on those as well, because I think they took the same general concept as the Batman '89 comic of continuing the Christopher Reeve starring Richard Donner Superman films, basically picking up after Superman 2 and doing a what if branching off point. Those are sensational, and I think those have not gotten the same spotlight, as DC doesn't promote Superman as much as they do Batman, and the second Superman 78 comic didn't really get much fanfare at all. So I think those were even better than the first Batman '89 comic, and I hope that we see a third of those. Whether or not we see a third Batman '89 comic, I don't know. But I must applaud DC for at least trying these different things and trying to get different portions of the fan bases of the characters, and also some of the fan bases that aren't necessarily into reading the actual comics. So there is something to be said about trying to have sort of fan outreach and get other aspects of the fan base that aren't necessarily buying and reading comics to maybe actually give the comics a try by getting them to go through this different door of these what if comics branching off of famous film adaptations of the classic characters. I just wish Batman '89 Echoes had been better, because I think there's the potential of a good story in there. In fact, several, but it's all jammed into one, and unfortunately none of it works. And I feel bad for having to say all of that, because I do really respect and admire all the people involved, and I did enjoy the first comic, but Echoes is just a mess, really, and I did not enjoy it at all, and frankly, it didn't even make any sense. So as always, I hope my babblings about the world of the Dark Knight detective himself and comics has been at least somewhat fun and informative. I know Echoes does not have a great reputation already, and the reviews are not great, and people are still griping, understandably, about the incredible amount of time it was delayed. So there is quite a lot of baggage associated with this book, and do be aware of that going in. It's not really a comic I would recommend to anyone, but if you're curious, there is now the collected hardcover trade version. As always, please do keep supporting your local comic shops and independent bookstores by buying books physically in order to help support your local stores who need all the help they can get. Keep reading comics, keep enjoying comics, whether print or digital, and as always, thank you ever so much for watching.